demonstrated pretty clearly that the majority of people on Twitter are not the majority.
Right.
So when you're dealing with a percentage of the people on Twitter that are the most vocal about these things, you're dealing with a very small percentage of the population. It's a confusing group of people. There's still a healthy center in this country of people that have had life experiences, do understand the tendencies that human beings have, and are very disturbed by this.
Well, I think it's important to recognize what is actually taking place. You have a completely novel environment in which we are figuring out what we think. We are engaging in an ancient behavior in which we talk to each other and we shout at each other and, look askance at each other. But the platforms on which we are doing this have changed the dynamic, and they have actually empowered something that wishes to control the narrative, and it's leaving a false impression about a consensus. Right? By punishing certain points of view, by deplatforming them, it creates the impression that there's a great deal of agreement about things that there isn't. And the real tragedy here, I mean, if you think back to the model I was talking about a little bit earlier, that effectively when there is no growth, people get antsy to figure out what they can substitute for it, and they very often substitute things that belong to other people. So the creation of a group of second-class citizens is one way that people who have stagnated can jumpstart the feeling of well-being in their life. And so there's sort of a competition about who is going to be the group of second-class citizens. Who can we all agree to go after? And the tragedy here is that if our understanding of the evidence is accurate, we actually have the tools to get us all out of this mess together. We could actually address this pandemic effectively at this point with what we have at our disposal. What we probably can't do is address it while, leaving Big Pharma's sacred cows untouched, right? We would have to agree that Big Pharma's rights do not trump the rest of our rights, and we would have to agree that it was time to deploy the best tools we had, and that we need to get the people who understand what's taking place most accurately in a room where they are free to say whatever they need to say to each other, that nobody's going to be penalized for wrong think in order to figure out what to do, and that is not going to come from, leaving Anthony Fauci where he is. It's not going to come from the blue team. It is going to come from a recognition that we are putting ourselves in a much worse situation by using business as usual tactics, and that it is time to step out of this and, get humanity out of the pickle that we have created for ourselves.
How do we do that, Heather?
Well, Joe, I guess one thing is we tend to be reductionist, we humans. It's very easy to say, this is a big complex system. I'm going to say it's that thing that we need to fix. And so, the story with COVID is too complicated to really do this about. But take COVID and schools. How about? Children have a very low rate of bad outcomes from COVID. And once they have had it, unless that they were one of those very, very, very rare cases where they had a bad outcome, they now have the natural immunity to which you have alluded, which is better than the immunity granted by vaccines. Given that, and given what humans are, given that we are these sensory, tactile, emotional people, things in the world that are not just about our eyes and our voices, having children masked in schools during the period when they are developing their most important understanding of what other humans are, except early in the pandemic when we really didn't know how this thing was progressing yet, it probably doesn't make sense.
I think the concern is the teachers and the staff, though.
But so it's different in every state. The states that I'm paying attention to anyway, the teachers and the staff are, to hear them tell it, protected because they're vaccinated.
Yeah, but we know that's not the case anymore.
Right.
Some of my friends that have been hit the hardest have been vaccinated, unfortunately, because they weren't healthy to begin with. So the vaccine, whatever protection it offered them initially, it's definitely better than not being vaccinated in that regard, but it's not enough. If you're obese and you eat terrible food and you don't exercise at all, you don't have a robust body, and your body does not deal with an intrusion in healthy and effective way.
Right. So,
That's-
what then are schools for? I mean,
Yeah.
maybe that's the question then that we have to be asking. And, is in-person schooling with masks better than completely remote schooling, where how many, well over 1 million, maybe well over many millions of children just sort of disappeared from the school rosters during Zoom schooling last year? And how many of those were low-income kids who may never get back into a system that could have helped them?
Right.
A lot, right? So is in-person schooling better compared to that? It would seem to be. But pretending that not seeing people's faces doesn't have developmental effects is just that, it's pretending. Every human being knows that we have to see each other in order to know
Yes.
what we're thinking and feeling and
Especially
saying.
little kids.
Especially little kids. The younger they are, the more important.
Yeah.
Right? So enough with the pretense.